Hey class, welcome back. I hope your area assignment is going very well. So far, from what I've read, there's been a lot of great work, so I will be touching more on that in a minute in this lecture. To start today, I wanted to give you a couple little updates and maybe a couple of things I could have clarified earlier in case there are any questions on these things. So sometimes I get questions about like why points are missing, grading, and how that all fits into my grading philosophy or what's all happened there. As I've said before, my goal is to give you as many points as possible for the work you're doing. I'm never really looking to like nitpick and take away points frivolously. In general, I give you points for doing the work. So for discussion boards, how that usually shakes out, usually I'm assigning like 10 points per paragraph you write, and then I assign you 5 points per response. So if you're missing, like, a lot of times people will forget to respond to people or they'll only respond to one. So there'll be like 5 points or 10 points off. So if you're missing some points and you're wondering why, that is probably why. I was leaving like those as comments, but that's starting to like eat into my time to tell you again to do stuff that I already told you to do. So I'm not going to mention that going forward. It's just kind of a little too much. And then in terms of quizzes, largely they're just like kind of determined by effort. Most of the time I'm just going to give you 5 points. If you get like a 3 to 4, it kind of just felt rushed or spotty. 1 to 2, it's a bad answer. And I only gave you points because you still did work, because I think that's fair. When it comes to assignments, like our Area X assignment, I grade those a lot more rigorously, and those will really give you a more clear indication of like how you're performing. I always have like a very in-depth rubric that it's like super kind of granular, and it should give you a very clear thing. So I'll get your grade based on how it falls in my rubric, and also I'll give you like a large top level comment. On the topic of feedback, I'm going to be shifting up the way I give you feedback on discussion boards. So the idea for discussion boards, kind of in a broader sense, is to try and like emulate or replace what we would have in terms of in-class discussions if we were in person. So that's why we're like trying to respond to two peers. That's why I'm trying to kind of find a way for us to have somewhat of an online community classroom. But really, there's no real way to make that authentic occur between people that don't want to or who aren't really into online communities. Like, I grew up being very involved in online communities, like, kind of my whole life. So it makes sense to me to, like, want to chat with people, but that's definitely not everyone's life and definitely not where everyone is at. So, in general, like, I think in terms of developing your writing skills, I do think discussion boards are a lot more beneficial because you actually have to write and everyone has to participate in this way versus we've all been in classes where people tend to dominate the conversation and the person who talks the most is maybe not always the person with the best things to say, etc. So I think it's better for your education in the long run. But what it also does is create a lot more work because I go from having one conversation with a group of students to having 40 one-on-one conversations, and I'm starting to see that that's not really viable in the long term. Along those lines, a lot of these one-on-one conversations I'm having are more or less on the same things. So what I would like to do going forward, I'm going to try this out, we'll see how we like it, is each week in my lecture I'm going to give you a bit more of my thoughts on the discussion board. I really don't dive too much into that usually unless it's in one of the questions. I'll do that, and then I'll talk about 2 to 3 responses I really liked, why I liked them, and then I'm going to talk in general about 3 things folks could have done better on. Along those lines, I would appreciate some feedback on a couple of things. What is like a good way to point out specific things in like bad or responses I think I could do better? I don't really want to be in a position where I am in public pulling like a piece of writing and be like, hey, this doesn't really work, and then have that tied directly to a student. That seems really icky. But I also want to be able to talk about these things in a way. So I was wondering what y'all might think about me using ChatGPT to kind of like clone responses, to like have them maybe take a response that isn't quite working, have it rewritten, and then be able to talk about it more objectively than like grilling or workshopping someone's work Let me know what you all think about that. Yeah, it's an idea right now, and I think it would be a good spot for me to like maybe model another way to use such a thing. But that's just kind of that's not something I'm really settled on. It's just something I'm thinking about. Couple reminders about the Area X assignment. In this lecture, I'm giving you feedback, kind of like I just outlined for the discussion board, specifically on our cover letters. I haven't gotten through to reading all of the journals yet because they were all the peer reviews were due Sunday. So, and it's Monday right now, so I have not read all of those. So, by probably tomorrow, I'll get it out, or by the end of day Wednesday, I will get it to you. That still gives you plenty of time by Sunday. If it starts getting past Wednesday, I will just extend the due date. Also, remember they are all due, assuming I don't change that, they're due Sunday, and they are all due in one single document, right? I only want one document from you, so I can make sure that'll just be easier for everyone. In the Dropbox, I've already given you instructions on how to do so, so that's already there. So you'll just need to copy and paste everything into one single document. It'll be first I think I have it set up to be your cover letter, then your journal, and then your writing process statement, and those in that order. It'll probably take me about 2 weeks to get back to you with feedback. Obviously, some will get sooner, but like if you haven't heard back in 2 weeks, then get crabby with me. But it does take me a fair amount of time to dive into these and give you quality feedback. And I have, well, in theory, I have about 40 of them to read. We'll see how many get turned in. Because some of you haven't turned anything in yet. And that's alarming because this is worth this is worth a large amount of points and is going to heavily impact your grade. So consider that if you haven't turned anything in yet. Another thing I need to work out is peer reviews on Canvas seem to give everyone a headache, and I don't feel like a lot of students get out of them. I do have an example of one I pulled out of a student who went really above and beyond that I wanted to highlight, but also peer reviews in general, I kind of have mixed feelings about because you quite frequently, and not to be offensive, like students really don't know how to give feedback because, like, if you're still learning how to do this writing thing very well, you don't necessarily know how to critique something usefully. So that usually means people are just going to say nice things about your paper and then say a couple things they might be very confident in, like, oh, you misspelled a few words, or that's not necessarily the most useful feedback you can get. But I do also think it's really important for you to read and analyze someone else's work and see what's happening. So my point here isn't really to like roast you all, but to kind of put a general feeler out there for if you've had like a model for peer reviews that's really worked well in the past online, if you could let me know, because I'm not sure how useful what we're doing on Canvas really is. Okay, so that's that. And then this was just a peer review I wanted to highlight that I thought did really well. This is all just one to one student. This student also wrote as lengthy of another one for another student. Honestly, in general, if you were doing about half of this, I'd be really stoked. I like how you mentioned teaching and mentoring. I think you can leverage the skills you need for this to your advantage, right? Like kind of like encouraging what they might want to see more, being really confident. You should input this more into your cover letter. The passion you have is clear, but we need to harness and turn in the right direction. That's nice. When reading this, I did, so that's like some top level, like, hey, like advocate for yourself a little bit more. You should be pushing this thing a little bit more. I think that's more to your advantage. That's like a top level concern. And then we move into like some like lower, more nitty gritty stuff. Like when I read this, I find some tricky run on sentences, repetition, and uncertainty. That's super clear feedback. Like, hey, you're rambling a little bit and there's some parts I don't quite follow. Try shortening your sentences up a bit. Some sentences seem to have multiple subjects. Okay, so this student has clearly been paying attention to the transitive vampire, which, don't worry, I haven't forgotten about it. And topics that didn't quite mesh in one sentence. Additionally, multiple times you mentioned the possible job opportunity and the prospect of bringing your experience. It sounds like you aren't fully confident in the service and expertise you can provide them. This kind of loops back up to what they were talking about in one. Overall, I just think you need to self-promote yourself more, right? And then clean up your prose. This was super, I would say this is super helpful feedback. So thank you to the student who did this. All right, moving on. So these are the questions I got last week from the quiz. I ended up taking, a lot of them were on writing process in one way or another. So by way of answering those, I just wanted to take the students, but I'm actually answering a broad bunch. But also thinking back on my comment to ChatGPT before, I was thinking about like bringing in a bunch of your questions and trying to use that to like create a shortened version of question that answers that I can speak to. So let me know what you would all think about that. I don't want to just like go ahead and steal your writing and plug it in there, even though I did that already once. I should ask for permission first. Okay, so this one is about the writing process statement. I don't tend to do a whole lot of outlining or drafting in my writing process. My first drafts usually end up similar to my final products. Most of the work is finished very quickly in my head before anything actually hits the page. I'm not really sure how I would describe my thought process because it's largely instinctual, subconscious. I don't make a separate document or even think much about structure or outline because I've done so much writing that at this point it's very ingrained. I just sit down and write. My first drafts come out looking mostly like a finished piece, and I usually only need to make minor edits. Even when I ask someone else to look over my writing, I don't usually get much feedback or criticism. Although that may be just a problem of me not having enough experienced writers to ask. Kind of what I was pointing to before. With this in mind, I'm not sure how to create something 2+ pages long to detail my process when there aren't very many steps to my writing process. So I'm very empathetic to this because as someone who's written a lot, that's my writing process, right? And I like it. If I don't think about it too much, I would be like, oh, I'm not really doing that much. I just sit down and I write. But this will also apply to people who are like very into outlining. You are already, whether or not you are aware of it, you already have a writing process, right? When you say most of my work is very finished very quickly in my head, you are writing already, right? If it's already up in here, right? There's not a big difference between what's going on up here and what's going on the page, except one exists in physical format, right? You've given it shape. But if you're not sure how to describe your thought process, because it's largely instinctual and subconscious, that means this assignment is going to be so important for you because you're thinking back and you're unpacking what you already know. This is something I struggle with as a teacher a lot because, right, I've been writing my whole life. I really understand this craft. So I really have to take steps back. You can let me know how good I am at that, but I really have to take steps back and think about these things as someone who might not be very good at them, which is always a tricky line to watch. I think some of the worst teachers I've ever had were too good at what they do to really know, and maybe lacked a certain self awareness to really know how to unpack what they're doing because it's so complex, right? If you ask a pro athlete, like someone who does the pole vault, right? That is such a complicated action where they would probably not be able to be the best person to give you advice on every little minute detail, where someone who's like a coach is going to be able to give you that kind of granular breakdown because they understand the mechanics of it, where when you're very good at something, you just kind of have a state of doing, right? So, with that in mind, like, just really be aware of the steps you're taking. If you are someone who writes with an outline, you're doing the same thing as someone who's not writing with an outline, or you just happen to be giving that outline a physical space to exist before you start writing, right? If you're doing the same process, you're kind of thinking about where you're going. So that's why I'm asking you to really think about what you're doing with your writing process, because I don't want to ascribe one singular writing process to you. Like when teachers always made me do outlines, I always felt like my work suffered because for me, I have a lot of, like this writer, I have a lot of enjoyment of just diving in and kind of finding what I'm writing about as I go. So that means my drafts usually kind of ebb and flow, right? I will have a draft. A lot of my like poems, especially before grad school, would end up very long. But what I learned in grad school by like writing every day and kind of thinking about my process a lot, I learned how to edit as I go. So by doing that process of reflection, you will inherently get better at it. Hopefully that made sense. Hopefully I wasn't being the teacher I was just complaining about there. Really a process about you figuring out what steps you're taking and explaining what happened. And also there's going to be a lot of problems to solve in this, right? Especially in the journal. I'm asking you to mishmash a bunch of different ideas together. So I would imagine there's going to be some things to talk about there. So also use it as a spot to talk about, hey, I really struggled with this. This was a thing I did to overcome this thing, right? So that's how I would approach that. So question 2 this week is, my concern about this writing assignment is that it is creative writing and not a factual essay. I am worried that it won't be creative enough, or I'll be copying encounters that happened in the book. I'm also concerned about putting the crawler's message in my own words, since I don't really fully comprehend it. So don't worry about, I'm not asking you to be Jeffrey Vandermeer, right? We're 4 or 5 weeks into a college course and he's a professional, prolific writer, right? So don't feel like you have to write something as good as Annihilation. And to a certain extent, I'm kind of asking you to have enough understanding of what happens in the book to kind of copy the encounters. So a couple clarifications on that. Again, I'm asking you to do something kind of hard, and I'm not going to hold it against you. And I'm asking you to do something kind of hard because there is value in you attempting to do something hard, right? It is me asking you to put all the skills we've been working on to the test, right? And I don't expect you to write a professional piece of prolific writing. I'm asking you to try and do something difficult. I'm also concerned about putting the crawler's message in my own words, since I don't fully comprehend it. So, here, another point of clarification is, I'm not really sure that the crawler's message has something to comprehend in it. It's kind of what it is because it is incomprehensible, right? So, I'm asking you to emulate the structure. The crawler's message has a structure of something that has meaning, but it doesn't have meaning itself. So try and emulate that tone. Try and emulate the feel of that. If you're really struggling, I think this is a place where something like ChatGPT could be helpful. So I'm going to pop over there and do a little bit of experimenting with that because I haven't quite figured out where I'm going with this, but I think I have an idea of how this might work. Okay, so this, I prompted it, hi, I am a college student trying to understand part of my assignment. My college professor asked me to use a piece of writing that is incomprehensible and to come up with something on my own. Can you help me understand how I can do that? It sounds like your professor is asking you to transfer something difficult or nonsensical into something more understandable and original, which is an interesting and creative challenge. Well, thanks, ChatGPT. That's not exactly what I'm trying to do. It needs to also be incomprehensible. Here, I will give you an example. So, I clarified what it meant, which is important, and I said, I see. So the goal is to create something that's intentionally incomprehensible, but still kind of poetic or meaningful in its own way. The examples you shared are mysterious, filled with abstract and vivid imagery. Here's how you can approach writing something like that. Use vivid and unusual imagery. Combine concepts that usually don't go together. The examples use fire, fruit, death, decay, and bliss. Things that evoke strong emotions but are mixed in unexpected ways. Super helpful here. Keep it abstract. Don't explain things fully. Let phrases create more questions than answers. Readers should feel like there's meaning, but not be sure what it is. Play with opposites or contradictions like life and death, bliss of not knowing. Contradictory ideas that create tension that feels both deep and confusing. That's really solid advice, actually. This is really useful here. Here's an attempt at something similar. The stars will drink from the river of your thoughts, and the silence of forgotten dreams shall carve a path through the sky. Beneath the weight of unseen hands, time shall fracture, yet the mirror will hold no reflection of the past. Cool. The soil will whisper secrets that no breath has ever uttered, and in the sleep of the mountains the wind will learn to bleed. So, these aren't wild answers. I wouldn't pull these, but I would use these as a way to start writing your own thing, right? And there's probably elements in your own writing you can play with, because as you look at these quotes, there shall be a fire that knows your name, and in the presence of the strangling fruit, its dark flame shall acquire every part of you. If you kind of think on it, there's some plot points that seem to line up with that. So think about creative ways you could remix stuff you've already written to do so. Here's another approach that I would just thought of. You are an incomprehensible deity, like one Lovecraft might come up with. I just found some of your writing. Could you continue writing it? Here is what I found. So then it popped some other stuff out, and you might, I wouldn't want you to copy and paste this because I don't think that would be the best thing for you to do. I mean, again, if you chose to do that, I just need you to put it in your writing process statement. But this should give you different ways to think about this. Seeing how ChatGPT picks up on the patterns of this writing and tries to create its own patterns should give you a clearer idea of what those patterns are and how you might try to use them. So this came up with, and when the sun is swallowed by the abyss, the stars shall speak in tongues that no mortal can comprehend. The sky will shatter like glass, and in its fracture 1,000 eyes shall gaze upon you, each one seeing deeper than the last. Cool. Whatever. That works. So that's another way you could use a tool like ChatGPT to help give you a sounding board or help you further understand what it is I'm asking you to do. Okay, we'll keep moving on. My biggest question is, how do you know where a good place to put a sentence fragment is? I was having a little trouble figuring out where to place my sentence fragments in my paragraph. Again, I think this might be a good spot to turn to ChatGPT, not because I'm trying to not answer this question, but because I think this is a way you can like use tools at your disposal to answer things, because you won't always have a teacher who's always just like, yes. Well, unless you have ChatGPT. I'm going to hop over to the same chat I had before. Okay, cool. Thank you. Now I have another question. So take a look at this. This is super helpful, right? A sentence fragment is basically an incomplete sentence. It might be missing a subject or a verb, so it doesn't fully express a full thought. Normally in a formal writing, you'd avoid them, but in creative writing, fragments can be useful for style and effect. Here's a quick example. The storm was terrifying, and we couldn't find shelter. Fragment, terrifying, no shelter in sight, right? So that is a quick and dirty way you could just use a sentence fragment, right? You can just use it to be, you can take a sentence you have and just strip it down to its components. I'm going to leave this for a second for you to read on your own if you'd like to pause, and then I'm going to keep moving on. So pause. And then this is like another process. We all deal with procrastination. What suggestions or advice would you give someone who procrastinates but is trying to be better? This is something where you're writing, again, writing process statement. You need to figure out what is stopping you and what work you're actually doing while you're procrastinating. If you're like me, I might be putting something off, but it's because I'm still kind of thinking about it, and I know that I'm not ready for it. Kind of like the writer earlier, like I'm always kind of, when I'm writing something, I'm kind of always thinking about it. So it might appear like I'm writing a poem in a sitting, but really I've been writing it in advance. In terms of actionable things, I think the scariest part about writing is that you feel, especially because you're in this feedback loop of procrastinating, you feel like every time you have to sit down and write, it's going to be this whole ordeal, right? Because you're always putting things off till the last minute. That's how I was in college. I didn't really develop a good writing process until I was in grad school and I actually started writing every day. I would always like be the student staying up and pulling an all-nighter the night before, which is something you can do when you're under 25, but kind of gets old after that. So a couple tips. Give yourself time and don't expect the same results that you'll get when you procrastinate, right? Procrastination is also tricky because it kind of feeds into good feeling head chemicals, right? Because you kind of get a rush from completing it, right? And you kind of get into having that rush, pulling it off every time. Totally natural, but it becomes very stressful when that's the only way you can work. So, again, this is kind of like a broken record thing. Give yourself time to work on things every day. And don't have the same expectations you have for when you normally sit down and write a 5-page paper in a sitting, right? Sit down and just have the intention of getting something down. Sit down and reread something that's interesting to you a little bit. Anything to just kind of not make you feel like you only have the option of procrastinating, right? It's kind of becomes a story you start telling yourself, and you kind of start justifying why you're doing it constantly. Okay, so that's all I have for questions this week. Cover letters. In general, I was very impressed with this assignment. There was a lot of creativity, energy, and it really felt like you actually enjoyed writing these. I hope that's true. It just felt different than like reading your discussion boards, which I know can kind of get to be a bog. And honestly, like I had a very difficult time choosing what I all wanted to highlight here because there was so much good stuff going on. So really like I ended up breaking it down into the 3 main sections of a cover letter, and I wanted to highlight ones that did like really well in each of those, but really by and large, I was very impressed with them. The biggest problems I saw were creative formatting. I know a lot of people feel inclined to go use a cover letter template that might be on Microsoft Word. In general, I would never discourage creativity, but this isn't really a graphic design course, and a lot of the formatting on those eats up your word count, right? And this is a writing class, so I really need to see your writing. I don't necessarily want to see a pretty template. In terms of advice on cover letters, no one's going to hire you just because you have a nice template. They're going to look at how you think first, so it can look like you're trying to use a template to cover up other things, right? A great template plus an excellent, or an excellent cover letter plus a great template might put you over the edge in terms of a selection process. But a really great template and a subpar cover letter, not going to fool anyone. And I'm not saying that to put down anyone who used a cover letter template. That's kind of very top level advice. On the flip side, there were some that kind of like rambled a little bit too much. Going over a page in a cover letter will hurt you also. If you've navigated the job market at all over the past few years, you know how much competition is happening, right? And especially when humans were actually reading these, ChatGPT doesn't get tired. HR software doesn't get tired. But when a human is reading these, fatigue is real, right? So you really need to navigate the sweet spot of really getting everything you need in about a page and in as few words as possible. You need to get to the point and you need to give them the exact info they're looking for. And there is also a little bit of a lack of specificity when applying. Remember, you got to state up front who you are, what you're applying for, and how you heard about the position. So in terms of an overview of a cover letter you should look at, and I'm going to I wrote one of these to show you as an example. Usually a cover letter takes on more or less the structure of a 3-paragraph essay. That's not hard and fast. A lot of people had the third part of this kind of broken up into 2 paragraphs, which is totally acceptable. In the first paragraph, you're stating what position you're applying for, where you heard about the job, why you're applying, and foreshadowing why you're a good fit, right? So this is going to be really formulaic. In the second paragraph, you're listing the specific skills and experience you have that make you a good fit for the role. The third paragraph, you list the outcomes about what will happen if they hire you and provide a CTA, that's a call to action, that's a marketing term for I'm writing to someone and telling them what to do. I'm asking them to do something. These aren't necessarily hard and fast rules, but I would think of them as general guidelines. Usually they have a heading for this one. I think we should just skip the heading. Again, I care more about your writing, and a lot of times they'll have a salutation. So let's dive into, like on a top level, here were some positions that really stood out to me that I thought were very creative. Detective, that's fun. That sounds like a good story. A philologist, a dentist. I think a dentist in Area X is kind of hilarious. Photographer, chef, theologian, nurse. All of these are really creative. If you just ended up being, the scientist or the biologist or the nurse, that's cool too. Not dogging on you. I just wanted to point out some really creative things that I saw come through that stood out to me. So examples of interesting opening paragraphs. Again, there were so many good opening paragraphs. I really had a hard time whittling these down. Really, I just picked these because they were what stood out to me the most. I am writing to inform you of my desire to participate in the 13th expedition to Area X. Great. The only thing I would add to that is I would say as a detective or mention the specific role. Small thing. I currently work as a local detective at a local PD. However, my background is much more extensive than that. I am looking for a change in my life, and I think we would both benefit from me having on the 13th expedition. Clear, to the point, gives you a mutual beneficial thing. Also very creative, right? So that stuck out to me. This one I really liked. I'm writing to express my interest in the psychologist position with Area X as advertised on North Idaho's Canvas. I thought this was fun inclusion, right? Just kind of, in a cover letter, you usually do traditionally list where you found the job role listed. So normally it'll be like Indeed or on Craigslist or on LinkedIn. But I thought it was fun to have it on North Idaho's Canvas. With a proven record of accomplishment of 15 years of professional experience in psychology, most recently as an active and participating psychologist, I'm confident along with skilled to be awarded with this position. Very confident. Throughout my career, I've dabbled in many distinct categories, helping the greater good. I've de-escalated many researchers' tantrums involving a dead end, along with recommending that young adults know how to navigate research beyond our physical researching resources. Fascinating, is it not? I don't know if I would include this little bit. But again, this opening line is really what drove me, what really stood out to me. It's just so clear and straightforward. And again, I'm writing to express an interest in your expedition team to explore Area X as a mycologist, right? That has all of the elements. It doesn't list where they found the thing, but that's minor. I have worked with many types of fungi in many different environments, tranquil and extreme and unpredictable. My background is mainly in identifying and researching fungi and deep diving how they interact with certain ecosystems or organisms. However, a perk that comes with all of this research is that I learn about what traits make certain fungi edible and which traits to show possible medicinal properties, which could be very helpful in Area X, where it is rural and new supplies aren't easily found. Super clear, super to the point, giving you, like the reader, the presumed reader, things to be interested in about this person up front, right? I want this position. Here's some stuff that sets me apart. Here's how that's useful for you. Good. So, middle paragraphs. What I really liked about this was the use of bullet points. This is like a very businessy thing. This is how my partner writes her cover letters. She'll always have like bullet points, which I think is a smart. It's kind of a blend between a cover letter and a resume in a way. But it also shows like good organizational skills just up front. So when I wrote a cover letter for this, I tried that out. I'm a very highly motivated individual who can perform under amount of pressure at any given moment, no matter the difficulty of the task. My problem solving and team skills have gotten me through many situations in my 10 years of being a core nurse. The qualities which I'll bring to your agency include problem solving, strength, and leadership skills, right? And then this author writes a little bit about those details. Cool. This one was really creative. This person imagined a scenario where they would actually read the biologist's journal. So they said they found it on the dark web. Some people know about the biologist and her account of the 12th expedition, right? So it's kind of giving world building. I believe I would be a suitable candidate for this position because I have many uncommon skills that would be beneficial to such an expedition. I spent a few years living in a village where I learned how to survive off the land, how to use herbs for medicine, and how to hunt. These skills will come in handy during an expedition if our food rations become scarce. Also, sharpshooting skills. I would be able to provide food for the group and patch up and treat injuries and keep our group specific from various threats. So a little of this might be more of the intro paragraph, and a little of it is more like focused on what I would normally expect in the body paragraph of a cover letter, but it's super creative and it's super fun to read, and there's always points for that. Lastly, I really liked this one because it really spoke to like a person's philosophy and the way a person views the world, which I don't think is all you should be doing in a cover letter, but a cover letter should also show, the person who is reading this a lot about who you are. A lot about who you are and like how you think. And I thought this was very persuasive given the nature of Area X. The desire to be a part of something greater is deeply rooted in the influence of my grandfather, a stoic naturalist. That desire was just a piece of the puzzle that has helped shape who I am today. He inspired my love for exploration, nature, and taught me everything he knew of the natural world. He showed me how to weather storms and survive with only what nature provided. The most important lesson was to stay calm and persevere in the face of difficulty, and many a time since his lessons have served me well, right? So I thought this is a really like emotional appeal, really ethical appeal in terms of like ethos. But again, this stood out to me because it was so unique. And I think maybe I'm being a little contradictory here because I just told you should be very specific in the body paragraph, and I'm highlighting all of these ones that stood out to me because they were very unique. Welcome to English 102. Examples of solid outro paragraphs. So a lot of these ended up being broken down into two, which is fine with me. It's a matter of preference in this. I always shoot for like one single closing paragraph, but that is probably the English teacher in me because to me, a paragraph has to be 3 to 5 sentences. So having a paragraph with 2 sentences doesn't work in my mind, but business people are different. They don't have rules. So given the unique area of areas, I'm drawn to its mysteries to help discover how it affects the human mind, which could help our government discover life-saving medications or new psychotherapeutic techniques. The possibilities are endless, and I just want to be a small part in a larger benefit to humanity. I am eager to bring my skills as a nurse to the Southern Reach Agency in order to do something bigger than myself and to contribute to the understanding of Area X. Really persuasive. I think it really fits into something that they might be looking for at Area X, which is, being a team player, right? So much of what happens in the beginning of this book is the breakdown of a team structure. And it's just very persuasive. Working as a part of a team in the medical office setting in a field with the first aid responders has provided me with the abilities necessary to thrive in a group setting. Great, right? Because this is really focused on how much of a group project this is in the book. This above all meshes with the Southern Reach's goal of sending a successful expedition into Area X. I could not be more enthused about being a part of the team selected for the 13th expedition. Please contact me with the phone number or email provided up above to set up an interview. Thank you for your time. This is really straight and businessy, and it's so to the point that it works very nicely. I have been a successful student in chemistry, biology, microbiology, and I know that I want to continue to grow in the field of science. I'm pursuing the research position, the research assistant position, to better understand the world of science, the world around me, and help the community. Right? This is really opening, right? This really makes me think that this person is open-minded, and I want to be a part of a solution that helps stop the spread of Area X, right? This person is aware of what's happening in the position and the importance of this position. And then they say, all in the name of science, which made me chuckle, and I copied it in mine. So here is an example of what I wrote, kind of based on the advice I just gave you and the my how I view a cover letter, right? So I skipped over, because this is a writing assignment, let's just skip over the header stuff. I don't need dates. It was fun to see some of the creative things y'all did. Just give me a solid page of writing. My name is Taylor, a writer, educator, and musician located in the PNW, who's writing to inform you of his interest in the teacher position as advertised in the Inlander. I just made up where I found the listing. My 10 years of teaching experience in the humanities has prepared me to assist in the writing of coherent, detailed, and exceptional journals, which I understand are imperative to your investigative efforts. Further, my extensive background in the arts as a touring musician, published poet, and the owner of 2 cats. I threw that in there just to kind of show you something creative and off the wall, and not really trying to find a way to make something relevant that isn't. An owner of 2 cats will allow me to understand the ways in which Area X affects the humanity of those who enter the breach on the upcoming 13th expedition. Like I said, I liked those bullet points, so I used those in my middle paragraph. My lifelong desire to teach and understand what it means to be human has allowed me to develop a litany of useful hard and soft skills that would allow me to flourish both as a leader and a follower in Area. Right? Kind of showing, I can kind of follow in wherever. Listening, one of the most important aspects of teaching, Sorry, I did not proofread this before we did this. One of the most important aspects of teaching is not only directing students, but also listening to their needs in order to understand where it is they are struggling. It is also foundational to the skill of any musicianship. Interpretation. I'm an expert at interpreting a variety of writing forms, including journal entries and experimental poetry. I also regularly assist drunken bandmates to communicate. I thought it was funny. I don't know. Nurturing. Whether raising 2 wild cats or facilitating the intellectual development of my students, I'm dedicated to assisting in the healthy growth of other life forms, right? So these are all things that I just kind of thought spoke to what's going on, to the needs of someone in Area X. And also showing how you can kind of reach for something that, for want of a better term, is a little bit BS, and show them how you can use that skill to their benefit. Like one of the cover letters I read, a student was applying to be a student, and that student was like, "Oh, I'm a student, so I'm really malleable. I can really be whatever you want me to be." And I thought that was a smart, tricky way to do something like that. And then by way of outro, as a part of the 13th expedition, I would look forward to utilizing these skills to the benefit of both my fellow team members and the larger Southern Reach community. If you feel as I do that I would make an excellent choice for the teacher position in the 13th expedition into Area X, please reach out. And then I was biting on the in the name of science, the name of education and advancement, my name. So that's my cover letter. Don't steal this or feel like yours has to be exactly this. This is my cover letter because this is how my mind works, and I'm trying to show them how my mind works. What's important for you is for you to show me how your mind works. And don't worry, I'm not hiring any of you to go on a journey into Area X with me.